At Thanksgiving, when the candles were barely lit and everyone was pretending to be grateful, my dad stood up like he was delivering a sermon. "We're selling the family business," he said. "You're getting nothing." Gavin actually cheered. Mia lifted her phone like this was premium content for her followers. I didn't move. I just pressed my napkin flat against my lap and asked, "Calm as ever, Dad, who's the buyer?" He smirked, certain he held all the power. But that was the moment he had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. My name is Nova Hart, and for most of my life, I was the quiet shadow in a family that loved the sound of its own greatness. If you had walked into our Boston home growing up, the 6-bedroom colonial with trimmed hedges and a pool no one actually swam in, you would have seen framed photos of my siblings everywhere. Gavin winning nothing awards but posing like he did. Mia twirling in dresses for recitals she barely practiced for. And somewhere near the staircase, a picture of me, usually half hidden behind someone taller. That was the rhythm of the Hart household. Whoever shined the least faded the fastest. My father, Victor, built our family's software company the same way he ruled the dinner table, with volume certainty and an unshakable belief that he was always right. To him, legacy meant a bloodline of men taking over the business. Women filled the spaces around that idea, but never touched its center. When I got accepted into a top tech program, he called it cute. When Gavin overslept through half his college classes, Dad called it potential. Mom Elaine floated around the edges of every argument holding a wine glass and a soft apology. She had been raised to maintain peace even at the cost of her children's dignity. So when Dad shut me down, she pressed my hand under the table but said nothing out loud. That silence shaped me more than any criticism. The turning point came when I was 22. I had spent months designing a new integration solution, something the company desperately needed. I rehearsed my presentation for days, but 10 minutes into the boardroom meeting, Dad cut me off with a laugh. "This is theoretical nonsense," he said in front of men twice his age and 10 times as proud. The humiliation landed so sharply that my legs shook under the table. I walked out of that room knowing the company would never belong to me because it had never been allowed to. So I left Boston. No goodbye dinner, no dramatic exit speech, just a studio apartment in San Francisco, ramen nights, cheap coffee, and 70-hour work weeks where no one knew my last name. That anonymity was freedom. I built my first product alone, my second with a freelance team. The third attracted real investors. And eventually, the empire I built quietly, deliberately became the kind of entity my father's company would one day beg for help. And yet every Thanksgiving I came home, the dynamic never changed. Gavin bragged about handling big accounts, even though he barely handled his own alarms. Mia live-streamed every corner of the house, narrating her life as if it were a reality show. Dad barely looked up when I walked in. But this year felt different the moment I stepped through the door. Dad kept whispering near the study. Gavin was unusually smug, and Mia stopped recording just long enough to smirk at me like she knew something I didn't. I should have sensed what was coming, but I had a secret of my own. I noticed it the second evening I was home. The house had a pulse, a hum, like everyone was waiting for a moment they thought would break me. Dad kept slipping into his study, lowering his voice whenever footsteps approached. Gavin strutted around as if he'd already inherited something, and Mia, usually glued to her phone, kept watching Dad with this anticipatory sparkle, like a kid waiting for fireworks. The moment that confirmed everything came when I passed Dad's study on my way to the kitchen. His door was cracked just enough for his voice to spill through. "Yes, the offer stands, $50 million. We sign after the holiday." A pause. "No, my children won't be involved. It's better they don't know. $50 million. A secret sale. No involvement." My fingers tightened around the railing. The family business wasn't just a revenue stream, it was his identity, his pride, the throne he always shoved Gavin onto. Selling it without so much as a conversation, that wasn't oversight. That was intentional erasure, the kind he'd practiced my whole life. I leaned closer. "Yes, Everest Holdings," he said. "They're eager. We'll close immediately after Thanksgiving." Everest Holdings. The name hit like a stone dropped in dark water. My company, my empire, my mask. I didn't react, not outwardly. I simply stepped away before he sensed me, my heartbeat steadying into something cold, patient, sharp-edged. In the kitchen, Rosa was chopping herbs, humming softly. She looked up when I entered. "You all right, Miss Nova?" she asked. I smiled. Never better. And strangely, it was true. For the first time, I could see the entire board, every piece, exactly where I'd left it. Later that night, I joined the family in the living room. Gavin sprawled across the couch, recounting some huge client win he definitely didn't earn. Mia positioned herself under the best lighting, recounting her follower count jump. Dad sat by the fireplace with a glass of scotch, radiating that smugness he believed passed for leadership. "So Nova," Gavin said, swirling his drink, still doing, what do you call it? Your little tech consulting thing. Little. Consulting. Thing. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked, "And how's the company's third quarter spending going? Everything balanced?" His jaw flickered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, nothing," I said lightly. "Just curious how tightly you're managing those payments." He stiffened, the color pulling slightly from his face. Because he knew. And I knew. 300,000 missing over 3 years, buried under fabricated vendor entries and bills marked urgent. Dad had no idea, but I did. Mia, sensing tension, lifted her phone. "Should I go live?" "People love family drama." "No." Dad barked. "Not tonight." But it was too late. The fuse was already lit. I sat back, crossing my legs, letting the quiet stretch. Because tomorrow, at Thanksgiving dinner, Dad would announce his big secret, and I would reveal mine. Thanksgiving morning broke cold and bright, the kind of New England light that made the house look softer than the people inside it. Downstairs, the kitchen buzzed, pots clattering, Rosa whispering instructions, the oven door slamming shut. The smells should have felt comforting. Instead, they pressed against my ribs like a weight. At the dining table place, cards were set with the same hierarchy as always. Dad, at the head, Gavin at his right, Mia at his left. Mom at the opposite end, quiet and decorative, and me tucked at the far corner like an afterthought someone remembered at the last minute. I didn't mind. Corners are where you see everything. Dad barely acknowledged me as I passed. He was reviewing documents, my documents technically printed neatly and clipped into a folder he didn't realize my legal team had assembled. His confidence was almost tender, like watching a man polish the chains he didn't know were already locked around his wrist. "Busy morning?" I asked lightly. "Important business," he said. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with." I let the condescension slide over me. It didn't hurt anymore. It just confirmed what I already knew today was necessary. Mom floated around the table, adjusting napkins, eyes down like she could smooth her guilt the way she smoothed linens. She glanced at me once, a flicker of apology she wouldn't dare speak aloud. As guests began to arrive, distant relatives, a couple of Dad's longtime advisors, I stayed mostly silent, listening, observing. Every word they spoke reinforced a story they'd lived in for decades. Victor Hart as the brilliant patriarch Gavin, as the heir Mia, as the ornamental daughter, and me as, well, invisible. Invisible people make the best architects of change. Dinner began with predictable stiffness. Mom insisted we go around the table sharing gratitude. Gavin bragged about a major account win. Mia thanked her followers. Dad praised the legacy he'd built. I said nothing. Gratitude would come later. The tension snapped when dessert arrived. Dad tapped his glass, the sound slicing through chatter. He rose, shoulders squared the way he always did when performing power. "I've made a decision," he announced. "One that secures the future of our family name." A dramatic pause. "I'm selling the company." Gasps. Gavin's fork clattered. Mia's phone shot upward like a reflex. But what Gavin sputtered? To who? Dad lifted his chin, pride swelling. "A firm called Everest Holdings. The deal is $50 million, and no, none of you will receive shares. You'll forge your own paths." Mia's mouth fell open. Gavin's face reddened. Mom stared at her plate like it might swallow her. All eyes eventually landed on me, because I was the only one smiling. Tomorrow morning, he thought he'd become free of the empire he built. He had no idea he was handing it to me. The room didn't fall silent all at once. It collapsed in waves, first a stunned inhale from Mia, then the scrape of Gavin's chair, then the soft, embarrassed cough of one of Dad's advisors. The chandelier above us hummed faintly like even the house was holding its breath. Dad mistook their shock for admiration. He always did. "This decision ensures our legacy," he continued, chest puffed. "Everest Holdings is paying a premium, $50 million, finalized tomorrow morning." Mia blinked rapidly, her voice trembling. "Wait, nothing for us. Not even a trust. Daddy, my entire brand is built around being the heart heiress." "You'll adapt," Dad cut in. "It's time you learned independence." Gavin's reaction was less delicate. He slammed his palm against the table, rattling silverware. "Are you insane? I've dedicated my life to that company. You can't just sell it out from under us." "You dedicated your life," I murmured, but no one heard me. Or maybe they didn't want to. Dad's lips tightened. "Watch your tone, Gavin. I made this company what it is, not you." And there it was, the crack in the golden child illusion. A flicker of fear crossed Gavin's face just long enough for him to understand how disposable he really was. I folded my napkin, slowly smoothing the edges. The motion grounded me even as adrenaline gathered sharp and bright beneath my ribs. Dad looked at me last. He always saved me for last. "Nova," he said with that familiar patronizing calm, "I assume you understand. This business was never the right fit for you. You've chosen your little West Coast projects. You'll be fine." Little West Coast projects. The words landed like they always had a dismissal wrapped in a smile. But this time they didn't hurt. This time they confirmed that he still had no idea who I'd become. I met his gaze. "Just one question." He nodded, granting me the floor he assumed I'd use gently. "Who's the buyer?" His smile broadened, dripping pride. "A brilliant firm, Everest Holdings. They're positioned to scale in ways we never could. They recognize the true value of what I built. And the price $50 million, he repeated. A generous offer. I let out a soft breath, half laugh, half relief. This was it. The moment I'd spent 10 years building toward. 10 years of sleepless nights, ramen dinners, coded prototypes, reinvested revenue and strategic acquisitions. 10 years of being unseen, underestimated, ignored. "Interesting," I said, "because I am Everest Holdings." Silence. Actual silence. Thick ringing absolute. Even Mia forgot to film. Dad blinked, confused at first, like I'd told a joke with the wrong punchline. "What I am Everest Holdings," I repeated. "The founder, the majority stakeholder, the person whose signature will finalize the contract tomorrow." Confusion cracked into shock, then disbelieving anger. "That's impossible," he snapped. "Everest Holdings is run by Emily Stone. She's a tech investor." "M. Stone," I corrected gently. "Short for Nova Emerson Hart, my legal middle name." I reached into my clutch and pulled out one of my business cards. Matte black embossed lettering, simple and unmistakable. His hand trembled as he picked it up. This is absurd. This can't be." "It is," I said. "When I left Boston 10 years ago, I didn't fail. I built. I founded a company, scaled it, acquired others, expanded into enterprise tech. I studied your quarterly reports, identified your weaknesses, and positioned Everest as the perfect buyer." One of Dad's advisors coughed nervously. Another stared at me like I'd rewritten gravity. Gavin shot to his feet. "You manipulated us. You plotted against your own family." I turned to him, calm. Everything I learned was public. Market data, vendor relationships, client histories, competitor performance. "And your spending." Color drained from his face. Dad looked between us. "What spending?" "Ah, there it was." Very calmly, I said, "Gavin has been filing payments to fabricated vendors. Over the last 3 years, around 300,000. Rosa froze at the doorway, clutching a tray. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Mia whispered, "Oh my God," like she finally had the live stream moment of her dreams. "That's a lie," Gavin shouted. "You're making things up to distract from—" "I have the records," I said. "Time-stamped entries, transfers to offshore accounts, IP logs from your office computer." His jaw clenched so hard his teeth clicked. Dad sank slowly into his chair, the disbelief hitting him like a slow-moving wave. "My own son. Embezzled from my company." "No," I corrected. "From my company. As of the board vote, Everest owns controlling interest. Legally, the transfer of ownership is complete. His eyes went glassy. I watched realization settle into him like frost. This isn't just revenge, he whispered. No, I said softly. Revenge would have been destroying you publicly 10 years ago. This is reclamation. The chandelier buzzed. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. The world felt hyper-focused, each detail sharp enough to cut. Mom finally spoke, voice shaking. Nova! How long have you since I left? I said. Since the boardroom meeting when Dad told me my ideas were childish. Since he cut me off mid-sentence and told the room not to take me seriously. Since the day I realized I would never grow in the shadow he kept casting. Dad swallowed loudly. And you're taking everything from me. I knelt so I was eye level with him. No, I said. I'm giving you a way out. You built something valuable. You expanded what Grandpa started. But the industry moved forward. You refused to. The sale protects the company, the employees, the legacy. I'm not destroying it. I'm saving it. Gavin scoffed. You want to run it alone? Good luck. I'm not running it alone, I replied. I have a full executive team. People trained in operations, finance, innovation. And us, Mia asked quietly. Her mascara smeared her voice small. What happens to us for you? I softened. There's a place if you want one. A legitimate one. Communications, branding, media strategy. If you're willing to actually learn. She nodded slowly, stunned. Gavin's voice cut through the moment, brittle with fear. And me? You'll repay the funds, I said. You'll step down. And if you truly want a future in the company, you'll go back to school. Study. Earn it. No shortcuts. His expression splintered between shame and rage. And me, Dad asked, voice almost a whisper. You'll be chairman emeritus, I said, a respected advisor but not decision maker, a symbolic role for a man who built the foundation but can't lead its future. He closed his eyes, not anger, not pride, something in between, maybe grief or acceptance. I stood, letting the silence breathe. Then Dad looked up at me with something I had spent my whole life chasing but never thought I'd receive. Not approval, recognition. You outgrew us, he said softly. No, I replied. I simply stopped shrinking. The room stayed frozen for several seconds before the noise of life crept back in the hum of the vent, the faint clatter from the kitchen, Mia's sniffle. It was done. Not revenge. Restoration. I had reclaimed my name, my legacy, and my seat at the table. The morning after Thanksgiving felt strangely quiet, as if the house itself was trying to reset. Frost clung to the windows, softening the sharp edges of everything that had cracked open the night before. By 8 a.m., the acquisition announcement went live. My phone buzzed nonstop messages from my executive team industry reporters, clients congratulating Everest Holdings on its bold expansion. Downstairs, I heard Dad's study door open, then close again. No shouting this time, just the sound of a man learning how to breathe in a world he no longer controlled. Gavin left early, avoiding eye contact. He paused only once at the foyer mirror, looking at himself like he didn't quite recognize the reflection. He would repay the money. He would rebuild if he chose to. Mia found me in the kitchen, her voice small. Did you really mean what you said about a real role? Yes, I told her. But it starts with responsibility, not followers, she nodded, wiping last night's mascara from under her eyes. Then, I want to try. Mom approached next, quieter than usual. Your father is proud, she said, even if he doesn't know how to say it yet. She touched my arm gently, and so am I. By afternoon, Dad emerged from his study. No folder in hand, no lecture prepared, just a man walking toward his daughter with hesitant steps. I'll take the advisory position, he said, if you still want me there. I nodded. It's where you belong, just not where you used to be. And for the first time, we stood as something closer to equals. 6 months later, I walked through the renovated lobby of what was now Hart Everest Technologies. Light poured through new glass walls, reflecting a company finally aligned with the future instead of clinging to the past. Dad's photo still hung beside my grandfather's unchanged, but a new frame stood beside them mine. Not as the forgotten middle child, not as the daughter who didn't fit the business, but as the woman who carried it into its next chapter. Gavin checked in from his graduate program every few weeks, humbled but trying. Mia had become a surprisingly effective communications lead, trading vanity posts for real strategy. Mom volunteered with organizations helping young women enter tech, determined not to repeat her silence. As for me, I finally felt like I was standing in the life I'd been building all along without asking anyone's permission. If you've ever felt underestimated by the people who should have seen you most clearly, I hope my story reminds you your value isn't theirs to decide. Share your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story.